For this one, I'm wearing Thrashers gear because I'm talking about the Thrashers GM who was promoted from within in Carolina to GM. And I'm looking back to 06-07 after we go through what he did as GM of the Atlanta Thrashers. And he was GM until 2010, after which Rick Dudley took over. I'm a little concerned, and I'm being honest, I'm a little concerned that the brain trust that's in charge of Carolina is one that kind of ran the Thrashers into the ground. The Thrashers were never horrible after their first few years. First few years they were truly awful. But once, they had their superstar in Kovalchuk, they were decent, but they weren't a playoff team. And that was the problem. They were good. They weren't awful, but they weren't good enough to make the playoffs. That sounds a lot like the Hurricanes right now. So let's take a look at the moves he made in 1999. So this is before the expansion draft even. He acquired Damian Rhodes from Ottawa for futures, which, good move. I didn't see anything where those futures were cashed in for anything major when I looked down the trade list, so we're good. And I'm only covering big trades that he made. It wasn't all bad news. Damian Rhodes didn't work out in Atlanta because he broke down. And there was no sign before Atlanta got him that Damian Rhodes was going to have a nightmare year in their expansion year, or that nightmare would continue after that. Now, at the draft, they did a deal with Burke, and Burke was running his mojo around with Chicago and Atlanta. He walked out with both of the Sedin twins. Atlanta got Patrick Stefan for their troubles, and also gave up a third-round draft pick. And honestly, that was really indicative of how things were going to end up for Atlanta. They get Patrick Stefan, who's seen as the best player in the draft. They were excited to get him. He wasn't seen as a superstar. Nobody said, oh, he's going to be a big star. The best descriptor I could use for it would be sort of like this past draft where Nico Hischier was number one. He was seen as good, not necessarily a huge superstar, not a guy who's going to transform your franchise, but a good player. And Stefan was seen the same way. That same year, they pick up Andrew Burnett for a 2000 draft pick that became Matt Hendricks. Good move. Andrew Burnett, very useful guy for expansion teams. He'd been useful for Nashville. I always liked Burnett, and he didn't complain about going to Atlanta. No complaints there from me either. Now, once they get up to 2002, which is where we pick up the trade storyline, they're still pretty bad. They acquired a fourth-round pick, which became Lane Manson for Ray Ferraro. I know Ferraro was in the twilight of his career, but fourth-round pick, it's kind of... Anyways, it's very similar to me to the Vanek deal that Vancouver did this year. It's just kind of a deal for the sake of making a deal. They also acquired a third-round pick, which became John Adams, a fourth-round pick, which became Guillaume Desbiens, who played for Vancouver for a short period and I believe also played for Calgary. And they drafted Kari Lehtinen, and all they had to give Florida in return was an assurance they wouldn't draft Jay Bouwmeester at number 2. Bouwmeester goes at number 3 to Florida, and all is well. Now, if they drafted Bouwmeester and not bothered picking up those draft picks, who never became major NHLers, how much different could Atlanta have looked? Well, without Lehtinen, they don't have a goaltender. And Lehtinen proved himself to be kind of fragile in Atlanta as well. And maybe there's just something with Atlanta. I don't know. 2005. So we'll jump ahead to 2005. They pick up the number 15 pick, which was Alex Bourret. Never played in the NHL. Excellent in EA Sports NHL games, though. Second round pick, Andrei Pavlik. Decent goaltender. Second round pick, Chad Denny. And a seventh round pick, Miles Stowe. It was a three-way trade. The Rangers get the number 12 pick, Mark Stahl. San Jose ended up with the number 8 pick, Devin Setaguchi. So when you look at this trade, it's not that lopsided. And Pavlik kind of evens it out, even though he was a second-round pick. And I know Jets and Thrashers fans not really enthused with Pavlik for the most part. But you have Pavlik, you have Lehtinen. That's not bad. That's a little bit of goaltending depth 3 years apart. They also traded Danny Heatley to Ottawa for Marian Hossa and Greg DeVries. Marian Hossa had some great chemistry with Ilya Kovalchuk when he got there, and played very, very well for Atlanta. So that was honestly a good move. Then 2007 hit. So in 2007, the Atlanta Thrashers are in a playoff spot. They got off to a really hot start. That really hot start, they rode to the finish. They didn't clinch their division for a while, but still, once they clinched it, it felt like they were going somewhere. So at the trade deadline, they grabbed Keith Tkachuk from St. Louis for Glenn Metropolitan. I like Metropolitan as a bottom six guy. First round draft pick Michael Backlund. Obviously, that pick eventually got moved to Calgary. Third round pick Brett Sauna, and second round pick Philip McRae. McRae had a handful of games in the NHL. Backlund, of course, has gone on to a pretty solid career in Calgary. And this kind of indicated a problem, as did this trade. They grab Alexei Zhitnik for Braden Coburn. So what this shows is that the Atlanta Thrashers were picking up guys who were veterans, trading away future. And this is a problem when it's your first year in the playoffs, and there's no guarantee you're going to be back in the playoffs. They gave up any shot at a first-round pick or a second-round pick in that draft. And this is kind of what hurt the team long-term. And kind of why when Winnipeg got this team, what was left of it, there really wasn't a whole lot there for them to build with. And it took Kevin Cheveldayoff a long time to get to where the Jets are right now. 2008, so this is the year after they made the playoffs, they were out. Marian Hossa wasn't staying in Atlanta, so they traded him out to Pittsburgh. They traded him with Pascal Dupuis for Colby Armstrong, Angelo Esposito, Eric Christensen, and a first-round pick that became Dalton Leveille. Not the most even trade I've ever seen, and probably one of the worst. And again, this is where sometimes GMs drive me nuts, where they add guys and fans will go, well, you got to get something, but you didn't. I like Colby Armstrong, but Christensen, Esposito, and that first-round pick, none of it went anywhere. Then in 2010, this is where doom takes place. Don Waddell traded Ilya Kovalchuk and Anssi Samela, and a second-round pick that became John Merrill for Nicholas Bergfors, Patrice Cormier, Johnny Oduya, a first-round pick that became Kevin Hayes, and a second-round pick that became Justin Hall. That's not anywhere near what Kovalchuk should have gotten in return. And the interesting part of this was that fans, even at the time, knew that was a bad trade. Nobody looked at that trade and said, oh, this will be fine. Now, I personally thought maybe if Bergfors gets his chance in Atlanta, maybe he can build himself up to being a decent middle-of-the-road guy. I figured like a Marco Sturm. He'll never be a big star, but maybe he'll put up 45, 50 points. No. And Cormier, for years, they waited for him at the NHL level, and he never showed up. Sort of like the more recent example I can think of is Jeremy Morin, who there was a lot of talk about, and then it just nothing. That same year, they traded Kari Lehtinen to Dallas, and at this point, Lehtinen was injured more than anything, so they were just dumping him off for Ivan Vishnevsky and a fourth-round pick, Ivan Telegan. So when you look at why Waddell wasn't there in 2011, this whole board tells you why, and especially towards the bottom. Now, keep in mind what Carolina's trying to do. You've got an owner who's tired of missing the playoffs and wants to see the team in the playoffs. The idea that you may see young guys get moved out for older players, it's not that unusual for Don Waddell to do this. But he's made some good moves. I'm gonna talk about that. 2002, Slava Kozlov was added with a second-round pick that became Joachim Lindstrom, for a second-round pick that became Nicolas Deslauriers, and a third-round pick that became John Adams, which is right here. So in 2002, that's not bad. Slava Kozlov had a very good run with the Atlanta Thrashers and enjoyed himself there. And it's easy to just, talk a lot about Waddell's losses, and I'm going to talk about some wins here. Todd White was signed as a UFA in the summer of 2007. So the idea being they needed a playmaking center to play with Kovalchuk and to really build up their top six. It didn't work. Todd White's first year, he had 14 goals, 23 assists for 37 points. And his second year, he had those 73 points, but they didn't make the playoffs that year. And they didn't make the playoffs either of those years because they only made the playoffs in 2007. That one playoff appearance, they kind of raided their draft picks and their prospects to get it, and it cost them. December 2007, though, Pittsburgh puts Mark Recchi on waivers, and Atlanta's smart enough to grab him, but they didn't keep him. Mark Recchi, of course, would go on in 2011 to play. I thought it was a rather key role with the Boston Bruins winning a Stanley Cup at the age of 43. And yeah, he was older and he was a little bit over the hill when he got to Atlanta, but if you'd kept him and if you still had Hossa and Kovalchuk, you got some decent scoring on the wings there. Now, looking at the draft history, 1999 you got Stefan at 1. 2000 you got Heatley at number 2. Kovalchuk you've got at number 1 in 2001, and Kari Lehtinen is number 2 in 2002. In 2003, Braden Coburn's drafted at 8, and then after that, it kind of falls off the rails a bit. 2004, the number 10 pick is Boris Valabic. 2005, the number 15 pick is Alex Bure. 2006, Brian Little's drafted at number 12, and Little did become a pretty good forward, just ask Winnipeg fans. 2007, they did not have a first or second round draft pick. 2008, they added Bogosian at number 3. You know how that turned out. 2009, Evander Kane is drafted at 4. If you're going to talk about what Winnipeg got for Bogosian, it was Winnipeg, it was not Atlanta. And then 2010, Alex Burmistrov drafted at number 8. And of course, Burmistrov is now out of hockey. Leased out of the NHL. Retired from the Canucks because he was frustrated with his role. And from watching him, I can't say that he deserved a bigger role than what he got. Of course, Evander Kane would turn out to have some issues in Winnipeg and get traded out. It's kind of a mess in that first round. This is from the year that they finished first in the division, from the 1 year that they finished in the playoffs. The Thrashers made the playoffs last year for the first time in franchise history, clinching the Southeast Division in the second to last game of the regular season. Took major changes to the roster in mid-season to get the Thrashers into the postseason, and once they were in, they were swept by the Rangers in the first round. It was a disappointing finish to what had been a breakthrough year. In the eyes of Thrashers co-owner Bruce Levinson, the season was a success, but the progress must continue. Our goal last year was to get to the playoffs. Our goal this year is to advance in the playoffs, he said. It will be a younger Thrashers team charged with making that happen. Captain Scott Mellanby retired after 21 NHL seasons, and the team also lost veteran Keith Tkachuk, who returned to the St. Louis Blues just before he became an unrestricted free agent. There are still question marks as to whether veteran center Steve Ruchin can return from a concussion that forced him out of the final couple months of the season. And Steve Ruchin, honestly, was one of my favorite, most underrated players. I really like Steve Ruchin. Instead, the Thrashers are hoping young players such as defenseman Toby Enstrom, every Jets fan's favorite, brought over from Sweden, and winger Brett Sterling, the AHL's Rookie of the Year last season, can contribute. It may mean the team's fast start of last season, one that helped them pad their record enough to win the division and make the playoffs, will be hard to duplicate. We're definitely capable of staying above 500 early in the season. That shouldn't be a fear of anyone, said GM Don Waddell. And it was. This magazine, for the record, did predict the Atlanta Thrashers to finish 8th in the conference and make the playoffs. Under Market Watch, after making the playoffs for the first time, the franchise is pleased with the number of season ticket renewals from the core fan base. The Thrashers also sold out both first-round games and created a buzz in a city where hockey trails the other major sports. The disappointing postseason sweep was a huge opportunity lost for the franchise, but the stretch run proved the town would support a winner. They never really had a chance to support a winner, did they? Etc. Waddell said a family-friendly atmosphere is crucial for the organization and the recruitment of players. Haviland's blonde sons often are on the ice after practice, and Eric Belangier's young daughter was spotted in the dressing room sporting a Belly Thrashers jersey after he joined the team. That atmosphere is one reason family man Todd White was willing to commit long-term in the opening minutes of free agency, and Kozlov signed for less in Atlanta. Todd White had 44 points in Minnesota the year before he signed in Atlanta, and he had 31 assists. So that's part of the reason why they saw him as an attractive option. And their departures, they lost Belanger, DeVries, Knighty, Mellanby, Sim, and Tkachuk. Basically the sandpaper. So if you're a fan of Carolina, if you're wanting to know Waddell's style, it's not completely unlike that which a GM might employ if they have a short-term approach. So think of what Tom Dundon has said about how he wants this over. He wants them in the playoffs. Trading away players with a bright future in favor of a veteran that you know will produce right now, it's risky. And so when people talk about, well, maybe we'll trade Skinner, maybe we'll trade one of the young defensemen, all I think to myself is, now that Don Waddell's in charge, yeah, but what's he going to get back? You might get back a guy who will help you right now, and 2 years from now we're talking about how stupid the Hurricanes look in retrospect because they got hosed in a trade. And it only got them into a number 2 wildcard spot and they got swept. That kind of thing. And I understand it's been a while since Carolina made the playoffs, and I understand the desire for them to improve and get better immediately, and just the overall frustration with being at the bottom. But it'll be interesting to see what Waddell does. So there you go. There's a just an overview of Don Waddell's time in Atlanta, the trades he made, just the significant ones. I didn't put up all the minor ones, and I really kind of ran out of the room for the bigger ones I wanted to cover. And his drafting record, if he drafts 1 or 2, pretty good. So Svechnikov will be joining Carolina is my guess. I can't see them not drafting Svechnikov. But it will be interesting to see what he does this summer. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And for fans of this channel in Atlanta, and there are some, there you go. Again, I'm going ahead and saying, yeah, the team went to Winnipeg, and I'm very glad they're in Winnipeg. But man, they really had a dog's breakfast to cheer for those 12 seasons. Thank you guys very much for, I guess, 12 years, 11 seasons. Anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.